Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Most Important Conversations. We're dealing with sex and relationships. I'm here with my co-host, Jenna Smith. Jenna, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm good.
Jenna, I think we should actually, for the new year, come up with a name specifically for this, right? This podcast that we're talking about. So we're going to come up with a really salty name that's going to make people blush, but also be accessible, right?
And you'll introduce it.
I'm happy to do so. No bashfulness here. Okay. Not at all. Well, Jenna, so we're going to have a guest on at some point in the next, I don't know when, probably within the next month or two. She's a dear friend of mine by the name of Margot Anand. Many people may know her, many may not, but she is the one who brought Tantra to the West. And I'm talking about way back in the 70s. So she's been at this for a long time. She's a leading thinker around Tantra. And for those of you who have probably heard of Tantra, you might think immediately, oh, that has to do with sex. Actually, technically, philosophically, it doesn't. It has to do with liberation, which in the West, because we have inherited this wonderful puritanical mindset that has made sex wrong, that has demonized it, that has called it sinful, evil, all the things.
Transactional. Do it for your
Transactional.
country.
Yeah. If you masturbate, you're going to lose your eyesight, all the things, right? That kind of stuff. And so Margot and I were talking last week, and she was saying to me, she's like, Chad, we have to do something about, all of this repressed sexual energy, this repressed sexuality, because it's coming out in toxic, awful ways. It comes out in violence. It comes out in mental health issues, depression, anxiety, chronic anxiety. There's many forms, as is typical with human beings, that repress anything. But especially when you're talking about repressed sexuality, if you're sort of a follower of Freud's work, and I know there's a lot of people who say, oh, it's debunked. I mean, his entire theory was based on repressed sexuality as being the ultimate driver of all human behavior. And I don't think that it's something that we should easily just toss away and say he didn't have a point. Maybe the way he thought about it or articulated it, we've evolved around and we've deepened and maybe refined a bit. But, if you think about the human animal, sexuality is the driver of why we exist, why we reproduce, right? And to deny that, to make that evil, to repress that is going to have all kinds of stuff. So, Jenna, I want to turn it over to you, but you, as a psychotherapist, I mean, you're dealing with people who are showing up with all of this stuff, whatever it is, however it shows up. They're unhappy, they're discontent, they're stressed, they're anxious, they're whatever's going on. Talk a little bit about the role of sexuality in terms of our mental health, how we manage our energy, human health, free wheel here.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So because of all of this repression and societal needs to be like, if we put it into modern society, like the people pleasing, like the good girl. So I work with a lot more women than men, but the men that I work with, I would see the sexual repression with more palpably as like frustration, like this like frustration they have that if they were in a state of more pleasure and a state of more, then they wouldn't be as frustrated. But I find with the women, they just kind of shut down and tolerate and then just ride that wave. Like they just opt out of sheer resignation. And
Now,
then
why do they shut down? What's going on there?
Well, so if they're married, in a lot of these cases, their sexual life is just come to the point where they no longer want to have sex with their husbands because they don't like how they're being had sex with. So there's just this like, oh, don't make his ego, like the idea of saying what you like, what you don't like, can you do it this way? Offending the male ego stops most women in their tracks. So like the lack of tools for communication, the lack of permission, the lack that you can even do that, like no one talks about it. So it ends up with these just, okay, well, we'll just not have sex because I don't even like it with this situation versus how do
Mhm.
we transform this? How do we get better? How do we grow? But we need more conversations like that. So the
Yeah.
consequence of anything repressed is like an ingrown hair. Like that energy has to go somewhere, but then it's consequential. It
Yeah.
becomes not good skin. And so the energy that doesn't get processed or doesn't get transmuted into action or something creative or something experiential, like anything in nature, becomes like a stagnant, like moldy. I talk
Mhm.
about repressed emotions as moldy boxes in a basement. And
Mhm.
no one wants to go in their basement and clear out moldy boxes, but they're also ashamed that they're there. So this repression creates multiple ripples of
Right.
consequences in people's lives as well. Lots of insecurity and lots of lack of feeling confident,
Mm. Mhm.
kind of same
So
thing.
so the experience for men and women around sex is obviously going to be different, but I want to go back for a minute to for all of our listeners, the moment you first met someone that you were sexually attracted to, and the aliveness, the energy that is coursing through you, the excitement, the feeling that, all is right with the world. And even when people are dating, so they're not married, they're not spending 24 hours, well, most people don't spend 24 hours with people they're married to, but they spend all their free time when they're not at work, they're usually with someone, a lot of it. And so what's the difference between why in dating relationships sex can stay hot and electric, and as soon as it becomes formalized, in a marriage contract, it's almost just a joke now, right? Like a running joke,
Hmm.
like, oh, that's the end of your sex life, right? The
Right.
old ball and chain, it's
Yeah.
like, so let's explore this, because
Yep.
I think this is part of the reason why marriage sucks, generally speaking. I just want to say that. I mean, if it
Yeah.
was a wonderful thing, you wouldn't have at least a 50% divorce rate.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, let's just say it's a failed institution, and it is an institution. I mean, the concept of marriage, we know it's been well documented now, is an atavistic throwback to property rights.
Yeah.
Right. And so we keep trying
That's
to
just not
fit.
sexy.
No, we try to. No, it's not. There's nothing sexy about property rights. So we're trying to fit love and sex inside of a property rights structure. Guys, how awful is this? Right.
Hmm.
So, I mean,
Hmm. Hmm. I wonder why it's not working.
yeah, I wonder.
Yeah.
But what
So
happens in that moment? Like, suddenly it's like, oh, we're married, and within months we're not having sex anymore, and yet it was just hot 7 months ago.
I think a few things. So one, the longer the relationship, the more the repressed emotions, say, in particular, resentment. There's just these resentments grow, and these resentments grow, and it's like, and then it's like, don't touch me, right? So when I was looking at repressed sexuality, we're also looking at repressed emotion. So they go hand in hand of the allowance of your humanness and your aliveness to move through your body. So if we look at the tantric act of liberation and feeling sensations, emotions are sensations, but it's like, ooh, unruly emotion, shoved down. Don't be a crazy woman or don't be that angry guy. Like all of that repression goes hand in hand with the sexual repression, but they could go
Yeah,
together really well when done well. It's just
yeah.
lack of tools, lack of training. That's my biggest thing. Cause like these people are just going unconsciously into these relationships and then thinking, oh, well, guess we're married. No tools, just their survival mechanisms doing their thing.
Okay, I have something I want to say, which is going to come across a little bit as a plug, because it is. But I want to just say to everyone listening right now, first of all, especially if you're not exclusively, but especially I've noticed in the entrepreneur world or the business world, if you're a leader in business or an executive or you're an entrepreneur, um, it even exacerbates more the repression of your own overall wellness, whether that's your sexuality or even your physical health and wellness, your diet, your exercise, all of this stuff. Relationships and wellness are always the first thing that are
Mm,
sacrificed in a world that is addicted to playing the game of these days, let's call it the I'm going to be a billionaire game, but the success game, right? It's
Yeah.
like everything else goes to hell until and unless I get this done. So, but even people who aren't in the category of entrepreneur and executive, you still have some version of this going on where this the regular busyness of life and the things that you're managing, especially then if you're in a relationship, a marriage relationship or something like that, a construct, usually the relationships and the wellness are going to, again, be sort of the afterthought. So I have the solution, incidentally, everyone. If you really want to tackle this in 2025 and get this handled, it's a threefer. Okay. Or we say a threesome on this show. It's a threesome solution. Okay. So what it is you're going to look up sky dancing Tantra because you need to, and then I'm going to go to what I was going to say about what you just brought up, Jenna. So you need to work with Margot and her group, Sky Dancing Tantra. They've been doing this for, I don't know, 40 years or whatever it is now, leaders in the world to help educate you on tantric energy and it will heal your relationship. Second, you want to work with Jenna privately, so jennasmithcoaching.com, because she's going to help you navigate what you're learning over in Skydancing Tantra. And the last thing, you're going to join the Jungle and the Gardener at TMIC Global. So we're dealing with the broad topic of sex and relationships. Margot's going to deal with the more intricate Tantra science part. And then Jenna's going to help you think through and make sense out of how do I deal with this? How do I deal with the stuff inside me as a personal individual that I've got going on, repression, whatever. Those three things, that threesome of solutions is your solution to handling your relationships. Now, you might be like, well, I'll leave that to another year. When? You're going to be what, 70, 80 by the time you finally decide to take this on? And we all know that relationships, if you're not in a thriving relationship, you're in a dying relationship. There's no middle ground here, right? It is the thing that either injects you with life and purpose and possibility and gives you energy to go make that $1 billion or make that business a success or even just have that successful career, or it's the thing that you're constantly fighting against. That's the detraction of your energy and a distraction of your potential. All right. So now I want to go to what you were just brought up there, because Margot made a comment to me the other day, which made me think of the little promo I just ad hoc did. She said, if you're going to be there's two options from her perspective. And, maybe she'd disagree with me and we're going to have her on and say that it's more nuanced than this. But in the conversation I had with her, she said, look, if you're going to be married, you've got to practice Tantra. Otherwise, your marriage is going to fail. And if you're not going to be married, you don't necessarily have to practice Tantra because you're going to get the variety of sexual partners and sexual experiences that's going to keep it fresh and alive. But if you're going to go into a construct and it's a monogamous construct, you've got to practice Tantra. And I actually think she's right about that. What do you think?
Absolutely. Because if you're not willing to like refresh the system and get fully present and come into your bodies and sync up and do all of the work, not the best word, but it is work to make the concerted effort to commit to that time with your whole being. You're going to build the resentments. You're going to, like, if you don't come together fully, completely in full presence with these practices, you're just going to build a bunch of residue and survive. They're just humans. It's like plaque on your teeth. If you don't brush them, we know what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. They rot and your relationship's going to rot.
That's right. Just make it go that much grosser.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm technically in a marriage relationship, and Tara and I have practiced, Tantra for years. I know you're not right now. And so I think we've got a good dynamic as an example to the world of how this can go. But if you're not paying attention to relationships, if you're not intentional with the nature of your relationship, it just becomes one of those other things that is dragging you down, dragging your energy down. And if you're listening and watching, you know what we're talking about.
Yeah. And I've had the front row seat in the dating of the men that have been dragged down, and they're just like trying to regain life force and themselves, and to even want to be in something committed again. Um, like, because they just have stopped having hope about it. They're just kind of not broken, but like really dragged down.
Do
So
you get
that's an interesting
resistance?
perspective.
Do you get resistance when you suggest to them some of these? Because some of the things we're talking about here, Tantra, sexual liberation, polyamory, things like that, they're still very taboo in the culture.
Yeah. I mean, I'm dating in a polyamory way, so they're already kind of begun in a really early stages, the process of like, huh, what could I do here to make this better? And, and then I'd already mentioned that a lot of their wives were the ones who wanted to go open relationship, but was really what started our conversation with this in the beginning of like me noticing men just being really raw and vulnerable about wanting to be of service, wanting to feel like they matter, wanting to be like powerful in this role, but not knowing how, and to express themselves sexually and to be deeply satisfied sexually, and to
Mhm.
I find at this point, because they're in their 40s, like a lot of interest in the pleasure of their partner. Whereas if I date younger guys, a little different. They're still a little like,
All about them.
yeah, that's funny. Not to say it's like across the board, but it's there's a desire for it, but there's also this depletion
Mm,
of just like, oh, it's been so hard. Whereas you're
yeah,
in it, right? So, but I'm seeing these doorways into people's intimate
yeah,
relationships via open relationship.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's interesting that whole concept has really grown over the years. People are more open to it, more
Open
accepting.
relationships.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
explore the possibility of that because, you think about it, like I think of divorce, right? And the
Hmm.
breaking up of a family dynamic, especially if there's kids involved. I
Hmm.
mean, to me, that seems far more damaging and dramatic than just saying, okay, we're obviously, and if you're not willing to do the tantric lifestyle and path to actually
Hmm.
deepen your connection and communication with one another and get to deeper levels of sexual experience, then the sort of open relationship, open marriage seems like the next best thing if you're in an existing relationship, instead of breaking up the family and having, to me, I'm like, why not try that first instead of going right to divorce? For some
I
reason,
see a
it's
lot
like,
of that. I see a
yeah,
lot of that. They're cohabitating. And if you're dating solo poly, it's like kind of like, well, I'm not gonna go to your house. But it makes sense to keep the family together, to not have this apartment over here and all this, again, feeding toxic individualism, having the community intact while they explore their sexuality. So I do see a lot of that. But it's not, you don't talk about it at a party. Like, it's still taboo. I wouldn't be seen with a guy who's married with his ring on in my small town, like romantically. Like, I'm
because
just gonna be like, we're
people
friends.
still get weirded out by that.
I just don't wanna.
Yeah,
Just don't
yeah.
want to deal with it. But yeah, like I still am like aware I'm having this show, but you'd have to find this show to watch the show. But publicly there's a definite taboo about it. But that staying with the family, they are trying that, and then
Hmm.
exploring like tantra, like sacred sex, there's some interest in exploring that, and unleashing the repression. I think because the thing about transformation is when the pain gets too big, you're
Hmm.
willing to do something different.
Hmm.
And that's a great opportunity. Like, well, this sucks. So willing to do something uncomfortable and new because this sucks. And we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, but what I'm saying that I think is odd is the willing to do something new is let's just blow this up.
Oh, the just
Ver-
divorce. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Versus, okay, let's be creative and try
Mm,
something more nuanced. But I think this goes to sort of the challenge that we have in our culture with needing to control, right? The egoic
mhm,
sort of I need to control, I need to predict, I need to know, I need to covet.
mhm,
And if I can't control and covet you, I don't even want you in my life, right? It's so
mm.
dramatic,
What do you
right?
mean by covet in this context? Like they
Covet, so like it's like you're mine and you can be with no one else. And
Oh, in that way.
if you're going to be
Mm.
with someone else, then we cannot be together.
Right, right.
right?
Like,
And, you know, I've thought about this for years. I'm like, it is interesting, this idea. I don't know where it came from. I think we've turned ourselves into a pretzel and twisted ourselves around this to try to make it make sense, but it actually doesn't. The idea that a single person can be all that you want to experience in your life. And when you think about like any kind of relationship, sexual or not, even just a friendship, we
mm-hmm,
human beings understand ourselves through another.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
That's how we understand ourselves.
mm-hmm,
This is why we call, you know, our organization the most important conversations, because through conversation, we are engaged in a social construction of our reality by exchanging viewpoints and perceptions of our reality. You know, I always tell people there are 8 billion different realities on this planet,
mm-hmm,
because every single person is taking in experiential data. They have their own past, and their brain is basically within milliseconds creating a best guess perceptual reality of what's going on.
mm-hmm,
And so the only way for us to understand ourselves and to create something we call culture, society, community is to share that with one another. And we do that through dialogue and conversation, right? So the idea that only one person in a romantic situation, in a sexual romantic relationship, can present to me all of the totality and possibility of who I am in the world seems like a high bar.
Yep, I know Esther Perel does a great job discussing all of this stuff of like you want the best friend and then this perfect lover and then the business partner and fitness pal and it's and people really need to focus more on a really unified partner that you could be a partner with, that you're actually complementary and compatible with as lifestyle people, and then potentially look at options for more openness, for less ownership, less insecurity about that. I think it's a lot about the insecurity of like, well, you're going to meet somebody that's better. And but if you're communicating and you have a strong relationship, then there's a lot of possibility there. I think we're at the beginning of that being more mainstream for sure, but it's a cool exploration of instead of you've one life, I have one life to be Jenna, like, and through dating poly, I've experienced myself through other people, both in how they see me, never meeting me before, like, oh, interesting. And then how I am with them and what that brings out in me, and the evolution from these relationships has been really interesting and exciting. It's like, do I want to let that go? I don't know. To be
Yeah.
continued. But it's like, wow, like, and then the synchronicities have been off the chain. Synchronicities, if people don't know, are like more than coincidences. It's something that you can tell the aliveness of life is working with you for you, and showing you these little signs. So um they've been off the chain with the dating that way.
Yeah.
Whereas you're in the marriage, like, I mean, it'd be very cool to keep it that way with your marriage as well, and then to look at what's possible. So anyway, I think you can't have it all from one person and that
No.
expectation. And then you also need really good friends. You also need a lot of relationship.
Yeah. 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 I agree. Well, even, and I think that's what Margot was getting at for those who are going to be in a marriage situation, or just call it a monogamous situation. Because you don't have to be, I don't think the institution of marriage holds as much weight. I know there's a
Right.
lot of people who are really attached to, you know, certain religious dogma. And but you know, all of that was invented, everyone. I mean, at some point it didn't exist in human history. And people did what they did before that, you know, just think about that. But anyway, you know, if you go back into human history and you look at the different models of relationship, what we're talking about here is not like the most unique thing ever. I mean, you can find all kinds of cultures throughout human history that were non-monogamous, polyamorous, and or a blend of marriage and, you know, this notion that we're trapped in the West, which is starting to fracture.
Hmm.
Because how can it not, with again with a
Hmm.
divorce rate, you know? Um, and the idea of, well, we just need more laws and more rules and more rigor in order to force people into this. This is the failing experiment. you know, clearly. So I think this goes to everyone knowing themselves and
Mhm.
knowing what makes them come alive for real, not just because society says or religion says or someone else says, what makes you come alive. And if a monogamous situation makes you come alive, then I think Margot's point is, well, you're going to need to practice Tantra because it's going to get monotonous. You know,
Yeah. Keep it alive.
monogamy is very close to monotony
Hmm.
as
And
a
taking
word.
for granted, and yeah, yeah, it's like any, like the plant that you don't water, like like it's inevitable.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The Monotony of Monogamy. That's a great
Hmm.
title. I know, you know, but anyway, unless you do
Chad likes
something,
words.
I love words. Yeah. Um, so I think this is, you know, now when you talk to people like your clients that you work with around this, I mean, what's the receptivity level? I mean, are people weirded out when you kind of get them to explore some of this, or do they come to you with these ideas? Like, how deep
Well,
is the conditioning in our society?
most of how I work with relationships is going to be with relationships or post divorce. Like that's been most of the relationship work. Single women after divorce, hence
So
the
they
book.
don't come together. You don't get a lot of that. Couples
Uh,
coming together.
oh no, I stopped offering that because I
Oh, okay.
they usually do it to break up. It's really not
Oh,
interesting.
okay.
It's like,
Right,
no,
right.
thank you. I like transforming.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
but there's usually the one that will come and then drags, like the husband's usually how that goes. And then the husband will do some work. And that's really gratifying to do it that way. But with the poly and open relationship, that's been more my self exploration. No, I see a lot more of post divorce or within the marriage. How do I um deal with this relationship when I'm transforming and becoming my most full self? So the real consequence I'm seeing is like how we've talked about this, creating a possible solution of them coming to the jungle and the gardener together for the man to, because it's my belief, actually, this is really great to say. While I'm dating men, they see how far I'll let them take me down in standards. How lazy can they be? How, like, for real. They're testing to see, do you care that I called you back? Do you care that if I did this? I see them see how far I can take them down, and then they will lose respect. But if I keep my standards here of like, here's how I need to be treated, they actually prefer to rise up.
Interesting.
But most women will like go on the internet, figure how to text them back and do this and do that. And they will
Huh.
cater and they never rise. And the woman is catering and no one is happy. Maybe, ooh, I've got the guy, but but in this weird thing.
That's interesting. So what you're saying is men are actually very responsive to the desires of a woman. The problem is, as a society, we have basically conditioned women not to be to be transparent and vocal and assertive about what their desires are. And many
Mhm.
women probably can't even access what their desires are.
No, let
Yeah.
alone how to say them without word vomiting. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of that. I think we're going to work on that with the jungle and the gardener,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. We are. Yeah.
how to communicate in a way that's still authentic to you, but I call it a word diet,
Yeah.
less words. Imagine
Yeah.
if you put your message in a tennis ball and you could
Mm,
throw it. Like what do you actually want to say right now? Not
yeah.
when you did this, I like that's not gonna throw they're not gonna catch it. Right. So that's one way I talk to women about they want to say all the things to be heard, but then they're not heard. Anyway, that's another
Hmm.
extra. But in the process for me of watching that, like, I'm here and then you need to rise up to here.
Hmm.
They want that, but not
Mm.
the women know how to hold that space for them to rise up. There's a lot more to say about that, but it's just this phenomenon I've seen about men not wanting to be mediocre, but women letting them be in the dating process.
So for women, what's interesting, so I was just having this conversation actually last week about how just generally in the human experience, it is a lot easier. So the brain naturally defaults to what's not working,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
survival.
because it's a survival thing, right?
Mhm, mhm,
So in that, it is easier for people to say what they don't want than it is for them to
mhm,
say what they want, because
mhm,
it's more
mhm,
readily available and present in their thinking.
Yeah.
And so
And
then I think
emotionally
of,
safe. Hmm.
yeah. And then, so then I think about women, on dating sites,
Hmm.
and there's the checklists and all the things that you go through, right, to try to find your match. And I'm going to guess that, it's easier for women to say, well, I don't want someone who's like this. I don't want someone who's like that. I don't want, right. But
Hmm.
for them to say concisely or in an articulate way, and know for sure, like it's an embodied no, right? I always
Hmm.
say to
Hmm.
people, if it's not a hell yes, it's a fuck no,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and so, but what's the hell yes? I think that's more difficult for people to get to, because we haven't been trained and taught about how to access, feel into, and articulate our desires.
Yeah. And to
But
date with that intention.
yeah.
So my dating process was the how to date without losing yourself, intentionally dating. And my metrics were interesting companionship, fun, like fun activities. And then what arose from that was like not having this list of like, he has to be this tall. I dated some shorter guys. I dated this. And then I was like, oh, interesting. I would have never dated this guy before if I was on this, you have to be Mr. Right trajectory. And
Mm,
I feel if people could date experientially, just start being with people. Oh, I really love, and so what I noticed for myself, like, oh, I love the energy of this guy and how, okay, I want more of that, and through that process. So that to me, because they have this, I need to get a guy like this, or I need to get a woman like this, that prevents them from knowing and embodying because they're not experiencing it. It's all in their head. Like this list is in their head, but they're not experiencing the contrast. And then what's even funnier is like once you get the thing, oh, I would like him to be in this kind of job that's like this. I'm like, oh, he never has time for me
mm-hmm,
because he's in this job like this.
mm,
Like,
mm,
so without the experience of it,
right.
it's this list. And we are a mental masturbatory
Mm-hmm,
society of like, I need to know it all before I do the thing. We talked about this in
right.
the beginning
Yeah.
about even us doing this podcast. Like, we did the
Just
thing,
start. Just start.
but don't just date willy nilly and don't be unsafe and stuff. But it's like, you can't understand something without the experience of the thing
Mm-hmm,
for the most part of it. Sometimes there's
mm-hmm.
some things I know I don't want to do. I don't have to experience them to know I don't. But that's where people are missing out is they're in their head with their checklists.
Yeah, and there's another important piece of this, which we will absolutely, and we do deal with in the Jungle and the Gardener, is whether you're dating or in relationship, showing up not whole and complete in and of yourself, and
Yes.
expecting someone else to fill those breakages and those gaps in your being.
That is everything. Like
Yeah.
when I'm dating, I can tell a guy wants me to be a void filler, is what I call it. I'm like, oh, you
Mm-hmm,
need me to fill this lacking aliveness in
mm-hmm,
your life. And it's like a palpable feeling.
mm-hmm.
I don't want a void filler. So you need to fill your own void. But then there's
Yeah.
the masculine, feminine. There's the beauty of relationship where there's certain things that you can't possibly feel fulfilled by until you're in that really
Sure.
great union. But that self relationship so that you can come together, so that you can not enmesh, is
Yeah.
imperative.
Yeah. The relationship should be a party. And really, I think it should be like a party, like a fun adventure
Yeah.
versus, oh, thank God that part of me is now full and I can feel complete.
Right. And then there's that societal checklist. I have a girlfriend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I've checked the box. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
not a great goal.
Well, I was going to say that's I think what's at the source of the why the whole manosphere thing, and we talked a little bit about that on a
Mhm,
couple
mhm,
episodes
mhm,
ago. This emergence of the manosphere, and what some people are calling this toxic masculinity or broken
mhm,
masculinity,
mhm.
is that there's sort of this resurgence of men as the dominant, and not in the let's have fun adventure dominant, but the actual like you're my property dominant, and you're going to
Yeah.
fill the brokenness in my life, and if you don't, right? But that's really in the manosphere of what's going on right now, is women as property, women as serving something, as opposed to, for a lot of these men, being whole and complete in and of themselves
Mm-hmm.
and being able to show up for the party, right? It's like nobody wants someone to come to a party empty-handed. And yet that's what happens in relationships is like people are showing up to the party empty-handed saying, I got nothing, but you got something. So that's why I'm here.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
That's not very attractive either.
No.
But yeah, becoming the whole person, and then that manosphere thing of, well, we talked, I think we talked a little bit about this, the phenomenon of men thinking they know what dominant means, and particularly in like a sex dynamic, power dynamic way. And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean controlling.
No.
It means leading, the
Yeah.
ability to lead because you know the other person so well.
Yeah.
Not to be like, I like it this way, and you're going to do what I want. Like,
Yeah.
no.
You're here to you're here
That's
to
not
fill
it.
me up. Yeah. Yeah.
And they
That's a
should
great
feel.
distinction.
I discovered that through noticing, through experiencing. I'd be like, well, explain to me why you're a dom. Like, just give me a scenario, you know?
Mm.
And they're like, well, I want to. I'm like, no. Like, you know, like,
No, I love that leading versus controlling. That's a very powerful distinction.
And in order to lead, you have to know yourself and have that self
Yourself.
relationship. And once you have self relationship,
Mhm.
you're able to feel in your own being and extend into someone else's at the
Mhm.
same time. But
Mhm.
you can't skip steps with that.
Yeah. It ties directly into even when we do things around leadership development, or say solving problems for companies, and we bring together, companies and their executive teams or even their more broad team, this whole idea of basically creating. And in order to co-create and to collaborate together, everyone has to show up whole and complete with who they are and what they know, and not be afraid of what they don't know, not be afraid of what they're lacking. It's not about what you're lacking. When you show up from that
Right.
perspective, the creativity between the two parties, or if it's more people, in a bit like a business setting, becomes this emergent property where it's not 1 and 1 and 2, it's like 1 + 1 is 11 in a
Mhm.
relationship with two people showing up whole and complete and being putting all of themselves. It's like you're
Mhm.
not hiding, you're not angling, you're not, um, so there's a lot of work that, and this is, I think, where your program, Jenna, for people who work with you independently, I think
Mhm.
I would call, for those listening and watching, Jenna's work in the threesome that I talked about earlier is helping you get whole and complete. You
Mhm.
whole and complete for the relationship, whatever it
Mhm.
is, whatever the dynamic you choose. The jungle
Mhm.
and the gardener, it's okay. People who are doing work with Jenna, getting whole and complete, are now in a more ontological conversation about the nature of relationships, the energy of relationships. What does it mean? How can we get them to thrive? And then you want to take it to that next deep level. That's where Skydancing, Tantra, and Margot's work comes in. And so
Mhm.
these three things work very nicely together, because I think the work that you are going to help people hone in on is, who are they in this whole equation? How can
Mhm.
they be whole and complete? And
Yeah.
where are they coming from a place of, well, their own inner brokenness? They may not relate to it that way, but that's fundamentally what it is. And everybody's broken because our society is so dysfunctional. And there's no
But yep.
shame in that.
Yeah. I just wrote down the word shame, but that's fun. I
Yeah. Yeah.
because what I was going to say is that ability to come in without the angling. Who
Yeah.
do I need to be to not be rejected right now?
Yeah.
Who do I need to be to not be rejected? But if you're inherently worthy at your core, which is true,
Hmm.
the personas and personalities are there from the fractures, from the I'm not enough, from the human feeling of shame is what creates defenses and personas that keep you separate. Oh, if they really saw me, that's the fear, right? If they really saw me, they'll see the crack, they'll see why I'm unlovable. If people can come and feel safe and get that everyone feels that way because we're all real sensitive and we all want to be in community and we all need to be in community, then it demystifies, not demystifies, but it dissolves shame. The
Mm-hmm.
community, a safe community, dissolves shame. And
Mm.
then someone can rewire that inherent worthiness and start to create and start to explore and start to share who they are more, because they're not afraid. Oh, if you really saw me, that's if the feeling of shame could speak, that's what it's saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it was Esther Pearl who actually said this, and I thought it was such a wise insight. She said that, I think it was her, that shame is a false emotion,
Mm.
that shame is an experience we have. And she calls it false because it's not innate or natural if we're whole and complete.
I agree with
But
that. Yep.
right? But
Mm-hmm.
but shame is actually our attempt to frame a situation where we
Mm.
remain in control. Because if we're
Mm.
at fault, and that's the shame feeling, then
Mm-hmm.
it's us we need to work on. So we can berate ourselves, we can punish
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, we can diminish ourselves, we can make ourselves not worthy. And it takes us off the hook from having to grow and evolve into who we can be. It's this
Mm.
very twisted sort of situation where if you're not at fault, then who is? Because we always need to blame someone to remain in
Mm-hmm.
control, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like I look at these situations like hurricanes happening in Florida, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this massive storm rolls in and a building collapses. And the
Mm-hmm.
first question everyone asks is, who's at fault? Who's to blame? Who are we going to sue? Right. And I'm like, could
Seriously?
it just, oh yeah, all the time, man. All you watch it. There are lawsuits
Okay.
all the
So,
time,
okay.
right? Who was the engineering firm that worked on this?
Oh,
Who didn't,
wow.
right? So it's always someone is to blame for
Mm-hmm.
everything that doesn't go the way we thought we had it buttoned up and controlled
Mm-hmm.
to be. So that's a macrocosm of what we do to ourselves. It's like
Mm-hmm.
someone needs to blame for why my relationships don't work, for why I can't make this, So it must be me. And
Right.
therefore, so I don't evolve myself. I just blame and shame myself.
I don't, there's so many offshoots of what I think about it. First, the funny one is there was a video, or sorry, a picture of a guy who had, who had like tethered his house down with these straps. I don't know whether that was AI generated
Oh
for
my
it to
gosh.
like keep his house down. And then there's like, I want to see what happens after. That's what I thought you were going to talk about. Like, I'm going to keep this, defy nature and belt strap my house
Well,
down to the
yeah.
ground. I don't know how that went. Shame is the emotion is false in that it isn't authentic emotion for a human, but the idea that because that it's a control thing is kind of where I'm like, I don't think I'm on board with that, because I think the feeling has come from such sensitive hurt. Ouch. I'm not
Hmm.
loved. Ouch. I'm not loved. That it's not really like attempt to control. I think once someone buys in to the belief that they're not enough, and it's like a deep intrinsic belief system that they're not enough, the thought that they're not enough continues the shame, and that then continues the blame cycle. Like, I can't possibly face this. I'm not enoughness. I must blame. That's the only option. Anyway, that's how I would
Hmm.
unpack how I
Yeah,
heard
it's
what
it's
you
it's an
said.
interesting thing to explore because when I think of it, and again, I think I got it from Esther Pearl. I'll try to find the video actually, because I think
Yeah.
it was a video I was watching where she was explaining that. And I thought, wow, that was such an insight, that it actually comes from the inability to release control.
Right. Yep. That is cool. And I do believe with it being false in that the belief that you're not enough creates this emotion
Mm,
of
hmm.
I'm wrong, I'm bad, I'm inherently unworthy, I'm inherently unlovable. The
Yeah.
phenomenon of shame isn't a like love, sad, anger, a
Yeah,
part.
that's what she was saying. Like if you think of fear, or you think of
Mhm, mhm, fear.
happiness, or you
Yeah.
think of these are there's nothing about it that you're spinning in your own rumination about. It's
Mhm,
just an
mhm,
experience you
mhm,
have. There's something dangerous, there's fear.
mhm,
There's something pleasant going on, there's happiness.
mhm,
Shame is this sort of perpetual cloud
mhm, mhm,
that
mhm.
that is all in your own mind. It's
Yeah.
not from an
But
external
it
source.
begins with that emotional wound of
Yeah.
that deep, deep rejection that you're not
Yeah.
enough. Anyway, I mean, that
Yeah.
was a fun little dance to do. But
Yeah.
within relationship, people are trying to hide that shame
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they don't want to be rejected. And I think what was interesting for me this summer in dating was that my goal was not to be not rejected. It was
Mm,
to experience myself, have these relationships, see how it goes. If it doesn't go well, we stop. If it
mhm,
goes well, we continue. My favorite version of that is like a Netflix subscription, when like you're just like, I don't want to watch anything on Netflix anymore. I'm going to unsubscribe.
mm,
That's how I
right.
treated it.
Yeah.
Do I want to go out with
Yeah.
you next week? Yes.
Yeah.
Like
But
there's enough juice
that's a
there.
healthy level of detachment, but you could only get to that healthy level of detachment if you're whole and complete.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm at an
Yeah.
advantage. And then when I worked with my kink coach, it was like, I'm at an advantage because all of this self-awareness was there for me to go, do I like this? Do I not like this? Do I try this
Hmm.
in a safe place within my own container as my own advocate
Hmm.
because I'd done the work.
Hmm.
So to do that work first before we do polyamory exploration, all this kind of stuff, partnering is imperative
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
allows all that stuff to become even better. But you can always start where you are. I just want to add that too. It's not like, oh, I have to do all this stuff and then I can. It's like start where you are with all this stuff.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it's about
Interesting.
the aliveness and the experiencing. Like if we go back to the core of what we're talking about today, liberation,
Yeah.
and liberated, alive humans make the world a
Yeah.
better place.
Yeah. Yeah. Because liberated humans, truly liberated humans, are standing in their whole and completeness. And when you're whole and complete, you don't not only have self-awareness, but you're accessing a true experience of your own power and
Mm-hmm.
when you, and your own creative power to create the life that you want. And to not feel that you need to. I always say to people in our whole life architecture work, which is a similar curriculum, ontological curriculum to the jungle and the gardener, that you're either bending to the world or the world bends to you. You
Mm-hmm.
choose.
Mm-hmm.
And most people are bending to the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but when you're whole and complete, standing in your own creative power, whether it's to create the relationship of your dreams, the business of your dreams, or whatever, the body of your dreams, the wellness, whatever, the world will bend to you. But you
Mm-hmm.
have to be standing in that power. So,
Mm-hmm.
well, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a good place to end today. This was a good conversation. Um, I guess some takeaways, everyone, is remember the threesome. Remember the threesome. Uh, I got to put a spin on it. I mean, we're talking
And of
about the
course,
subject
Chad gets
matter.
the 2 women for a threesome. So
Not always.
not always. Another show.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you on another episode of the most important conversations about sex and relationships. We are going to have a formal name for this because I think we need one. So we'll create that and we'll announce it at some point. So happy to have you joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
That concludes this episode of The Most Important Conversations. This in-depth conversation could set you on the path to self-improvement, which is essential if you want to be an effective leader and take meaningful action in your life. If you enjoyed this episode and want more of these stimulating discussions, you can find them at tmicglobal.com. Remember, the world is at a crossroads right now. You can't afford to waste this opportunity to take charge of your life, build meaningful relationships with others, and co-create a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.